please welcome Adam Met of Planet Reimagined.
Thank you. So I'm very lonely up here, so I'm not going to sit in one of these chairs, but I'm going to walk back and forth across the stage to make you move your necks a little bit. So I wear a lot of different hats, and you'll hear about these different hats throughout my next 9 minutes and 38 seconds that I have left on this stage. But I want to start by telling you a couple of different stories. So I guess my night job is that I'm a musician, and I play in front of, about 1 million people a year. And if you haven't heard of my band, it's called AJR. And if you haven't heard of it, feel free to go home and listen. It's totally okay. I don't blame you. I'm not going to, frown upon you if you haven't heard of us, but it's totally fine. But when I'm on tour, we do something called meet and greets, and you might have heard of this idea. Fans will normally pay to come meet us and take a picture with us and tell us a story before we go on stage. And I want to tell you a story about a really interesting young woman that I met in Indiana. Now, she came up to us and said, "I don't want a picture," which was a surprise to me because everyone always just wants a picture, to post on Instagram. But she said, "I want to tell you a story." She said, "I am a high school student, and I really care about ending single-use plastics in my high school." And I said, "Wow, that's fantastic. What are you doing?" And she said, "I started a petition in my high school to end all single-use plastics in the lunchroom." And I said, "That's great. How is it going?" And she said, "It went so well that we completely banned single-use plastics in my high school. I started a petition at the district level, and they banned all single-use plastics in schools across the district. And now she's working at the city level to try and get single-use plastics banned across all of the schools in the entire city." And I sat with that for a moment, and I said, that's what individual action is. Individual action is not changing your toothbrush out to be made of bamboo. Individual action is not using a cardboard straw, because God knows I hate those cardboard straws. But individual action is using the platform that you have in order to get other people to mobilize and use their platforms for concrete action. I'm going to tell you one more very short story. So while I've been on tour over the last decade or so, I stayed in school. I did my undergrad, my master's, and then my PhD. And I did my PhD in international human rights law and sustainable development. I looked at large-scale energy projects around the world, some coal projects, some oil and gas projects, but mostly renewable energy projects. And I spent 5 years working on it, and it was incredibly difficult. And I did this all while on tour, so most of it from the back of a tour bus. And it ended up being about 350 pages. And do you want to guess how many people read it? 3. 3 people read the 350 pages I wrote. And, not to toot my own horn, but it was really good. I created this whole strategy for corporations to look at human rights-based approaches to development, how to put humans first as you're developing energy projects around the world. And so I thought about these 2 different stories. I thought about the young woman who came up to me at this show, and then I also thought about how no one read all that work that I did. And I started to put those ideas together and said, okay, how can we build something that takes research, that takes thought, which normally sits on a shelf, and turn it into action, and then turn it into change? So using the platform that I built on the music side, and then using my education, I built an organization called Planet Reimagined, which is now about 4 years old, and that's exactly what we do. We bring in young people from around the world to work on projects that take research that they develop, turn it into advocacy, and then turn it into real-world action. And I'm going to tell you about a couple of these projects. So we offer programs for everyone from undergrad to postdocs, and one of my favorite ones was we brought in a climate scientist from Germany who was an undergrad student. We brought an architect from India, and we brought a supply chain management expert from New Jersey. And the best thing about this was they applied under the title of carbon economy, which is really broad. And so they had no idea what their project was going to be. And that's one of our goals, to let that creativity flow, to let somebody from India bring ideas to somebody from Germany, to somebody from the United States. And they spent a couple of weeks figuring out, okay, what's the overlap between architecture, climate science, and supply chain management? And over the course of a summer, they developed a new approach to urban rooftop farming in partnerships with supermarkets. So architecture meets supply chain management meets climate science. And they wrote a great white paper, and it didn't just end there. Yes, we published their white paper. They developed a whole advocacy strategy. We have partnerships with everyone from Time Magazine to Rolling Stone to iHeartRadio, which actually gives us space to reach 100 million listeners on the radio every year, both in the United States and internationally. And you might think urban rooftop farming, there's a lot of technical pieces to it, but what we do is we train them to give them the skills to take something incredibly complicated and make it really accessible. So what they did was they told the story of a carrot. A carrot, which is normally grown somewhere, and then travels more miles than most people in the United States do in an entire year to get to your plate. And they created a PSA that lasted 30 seconds and reached 100 million people on iHeartRadio, explaining why urban rooftop farming is the wave of the future. And they took it from having no idea what they were going to write about, to creating this idea, to creating an advocacy strategy, to creating this communication strategy. And then what we did is we actually put it into effect. We worked with a music venue in New York City, and now all of the fruits and vegetables that are used in their concession for the summers in which they have shows are built on top of shipping containers. So you can actually consume the food that was where the idea was come up with by these fellows, and they saw it all the way through the end. Now, this idea for Planet Reimagined, like I said, came out of these two stories of how do we bridge research and action. And one of the projects that I'm really excited about that kind of connects the last two panels that you heard and what this next one is going to be about is something that we're working on now. Now, advocacy comes in many different forms. Advocacy could be an awareness campaign, like I was just explaining, about this carrot, about urban rooftop farming. It could be getting people to march out in the streets, but it could also be really concrete policy change. And so that's what we're doing right now. Over the last year, we brought together groups from all around the world, people from all around the world, to work on a research and advocacy strategy around a topic called co-location. Co-location is the idea that we are going to be using oil and gas for a while. That's not going away tomorrow. But at the same time, there's huge potential for using renewable energy. There's huge potential for oil and gas companies to be investing in and transitioning their businesses into renewable energy. So we came up with a strategy using public land that's already set aside for oil and gas leases. Both the big guys that you probably guess who I'm talking about, the Chevrons, the Exxons, the BPs, the Shells of the world, but also the small guys. 80% of operators in the US are the small guys, the ones who produce about 100 barrels of oil or less a day. Now, what we did is we came up with a strategy to site renewable energy projects on top of where oil and gas is being produced. This eliminates a tremendous amount of regulatory issues. This eliminates new impact assessment reports. This begins to solve our transmission problem. And this all came out of the idea that our fellows are thinking about because they're bringing together these global perspectives. Now, I only have 1 minute left, but I want to tell you that now this idea for co-location has been agreed upon by over 24 members of the US House of Representatives, about 1/3 of the Senate, and various areas of the White House. And so it looks like by the end of the year, we should have approval to move forward with actually including co-location as an idea and in practice across the United States. It started as an idea. It was turned into research and partnerships with massive environmental organizations down to the small guys who want to be able to make this kind of change because it's a new economy, it creates new jobs, it creates new wealth, it's conservation. But at the same time, it makes sense in a bipartisan arena, as we heard from before. We are engaging with all different kinds of stakeholders. We're engaging with all different people around the world as we bring together these fellows. And to go back to the first story that I told you, every single person in this room has a platform. It doesn't matter how many followers you have on Instagram or online, or how many people you're capable of reaching through even events like this. If you can get people with different kinds of expertise together, this 1 + 1 + 1 = 10 effect exists, and it's out there. And that's what we've been trying to build, and that's what we have built with Planet Reimagined. So I just want to end by saying, if you have thought, you really have the ability to transform it into action, into this advocacy, and then you can actually see that change in the world that you want to see. Thank you.